All right, thank you everybody for joining the Thriving in Uncertain Times Cyber Resiliency Expert Panel. My name is Mark Dallmeier and I will be your host and the facilitator of the panel. So let's talk a little bit about the agenda. We've got a lot of ground to cover today, so we're going to do some introductions of the esteemed panel members. We're going to do a 2020 to 2022 look back, take a look at trends in the marketplace, talk a little bit about economic, workforce, and market realities that we've all been dealing with over the last 24 to 36 months. We're going to talk about current and recent cybersecurity and compliance realities that we're all dealing with. We'll jump into the expert panel discussion, so we'll ask the experts to weigh in on how to drive greater organizational resiliency and cyber resiliency. We'll do some key takeaways from the panel members and myself, and then we'll do a wrap up and a Q&A. There are a number of industry experts and professionals on this call today. So what I would suggest is if you have commentary, if you have best practices to share, if you have questions, please do not hesitate to share those in the chat. Again, thank you everybody for jumping on and carving out the time to participate in this live event. Again, my name is Mark Dallmeier. I've got 27 years of experience in technology and consulting industry segments. I've spent the last decade as CSO, CMO, CRO, and various cyber risk and compliance organizations. I'm currently the president of the Mars Suite line of business for All Points Logistics. All Points Logistics is a $200+ million global solution provider and prime contractor for DoD, Fed, NASA, Aerospace entities, and does a significant amount of work within the defense industry, armed forces, as well as other government agencies. With that, I will let the esteemed panel introduce themselves. And Dr. Stephen, why don't you kick it off?
Sounds great. Thank you, Mark. Thanks for having us here. Dr. Stephen Inocencio. I've been in my field about 31 years doing cybersecurity planning, strategies, been a CISO for several Fortune 500 companies and mid-sized companies, both domestic and international. Did some work with cyber counterintelligence for about 14 years, with some acronyms out on the East Coast. And I really enjoy helping people making informed decisions and getting them to a safe place that's sustainable and something they can operationalize without too much overhead or pain or costs. So trying to find the way of safety and security with simplicity is the combination. But thank you for having me here. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you, Stephen. Brian.
Hey, good morning, afternoon to everybody. Brian Grayek. I am currently the IT and Cybersecurity Director at REDW. We are one of the nation's largest CPA firms. We also are one of the premier advisory companies. So my cybersecurity practice basically advises our customers on what they should be doing in cybersecurity to help protect themselves in the current environment. I've got almost 40 years of experience. I've been a CISO, CSO, vice president of the 7th largest software company in the world. A lot of years of experience working with a lot of different the Fortune 500, Fortune 100 companies. But I enjoy today lending my expertise in order to help people stay secure in this challenging environment. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Thank you for being here, Brian. Mr. Vasko.
Thanks so much, Mark, and good morning, afternoon, everybody. I'm Ed Vasko. I'm the director of the Institute for Pervasive Cybersecurity at Boise State University. Prior to joining Boise State in 2020, I was the former CEO of Terra, Verde, based in Phoenix, Arizona, and then sold that to Growth Equity in 2018. And then became the SVP of Avertium. So the jump into academia really was after a 30-year run in industry. Many of my friends have asked me why, so I'll just put it out there plainly. I had a thesis that I wanted two really that I wanted to test. One was, is there a way that academia could better serve and better work with industry to produce a ready-to-work workforce in cyber, to help kind of fill some of the key needs that we have across the nation? And the second was, is there a way to tackle the cybersecurity poverty line that exists between urban urban or environments and well-funded companies and small businesses and rural environments and rural communities. And that poverty line is such that it creates a lot of potential risk and significant levels of concern at a national level. And so I joined Boise State in 2020 to run that institute, this institute and tackle those two particular questions. So thank you for having me.
Awesome. Gentlemen, thank you so much for carving out the time and investing the time with us today, as well as the attendees on the session. Let's do the 2020-2022 look back. The reality of the marketplace with the global pandemic was your organizations either needed to change or face extinction. So, these are some snippets from Accenture and Gartner, but it was really clear that organizations were refocusing on leadership, they were refocusing on transformation, and because everybody was sent home, organizations, right, had to dramatically change their work from home policies, the way that they were supporting customers, the way that they were supporting employees. And so that put a significant amount of stress on IT, on infrastructure, and it caused organizations to candidly transform their operations, transform their IT systems, IT service delivery, as well as their cybersecurity and risk postures and programs to match the realities of the business. Now, there were some interesting byproducts of that we saw in the marketplace in terms of changing expectations of executive leadership. Historically, when you went through this type of transformation, it might take 12, 18, 24 months to take an organization through that type of broad sweeping transformation. These organizations and these teams were miraculously doing this within a matter of months. And so, again, the byproduct of that was really trying to deal with expectation management, upstream and downstream, right? The amount of change and transformation that was achieved by many organizations who survived the pandemic and began to thrive during and after the pandemic. Those expectations had changed their realities forever. So organizations, as part of that process, began to look at their supply chains, at their operations, and saw a lot of fragility within those areas of their business. They also saw a significant amount of untrustworthiness and risk within supply chains, within operations or distributed operations, and they were struggling to overcome and address the risks to address customer and employee needs. So a lot of these organizations were forced to become experts at change and organizational change management. Companies, were beginning to compete for the future, right? So many organizations were trying to implement an innovation engine or some type of innovation acceleration program inside of their organization, so they can take a look at the customers, changing customer dynamics, changing customer and employee needs, transform their operations or their products and or services to basically capture the needs and address the requirements of the marketplace. And this caused a significant amount of change across all areas of the business. It also directly impacted, again, cybersecurity risk and compliance programs and their posture. Overwhelmingly, whether you followed Accenture, Gartner, KPMG, IBM, et cetera, overwhelmingly, KPMG, these organizations were publishing, look, the digital transformation of the enterprise is here, right? If the pandemic taught us and showed us anything, is that we need to be more nimble, we need to be more innovative, and we need to be more responsive to change. And so that change was pervasive across all industries globally. And really the change was to really drive addressing the future of work. And it wasn't just the future of work, but it was the future of end customer expectation, because the changing expectations and requirements from end customers was just as significant as the changing expectations of employees. Now, we take a look at those trends and what we all went through over the last couple of years. And then we start, dropping some of these, backstop data points on top, which is 83% of executives agree that their organizations, their business, their technology strategies are now becoming inseparable. They're indistinguishable from each other, meaning that technology is not just a cost center. Technology is an enablement center. It's an accelerator, right? It's a value multiplier. And by the way, that includes cybersecurity. And what we've seen through this change and transformation over the last few years is the organizations that viewed cybersecurity and their risk programs as an enabler and as an accelerator actually thrived during the pandemic because they were able to build differentiation. They were able to get ahead of the risk in the marketplace. 93% of executives reported that their organization is innovating with an urgency and a call to action within 2021 that carried forward in 2022. We still see that. And again, we believe this was in the best interest for these organizations. We believe that there was a lot of pent up innovation and transformation that needed to happen across a significant number of market segments. And this also brought security, zero trust architectures, right? Other programs and philosophies in terms of how to defend and protect proactively the enterprise to the forefront of these organizations. Now, 91% of executives agreed that capturing tomorrow's market will require them to actually defend or define what that means. So in translation, 91% of the executives that were surveyed, whether it be by Gartner or Accenture, reported, hey, the future is unstable. We still don't know what the future is going to hold, but whatever the future holds, we know a couple of things are certain. Number one, it's not going to be what it was. So we're not going to go back to the way we operated in the past, and requirements and expectations of employees and customers has forever changed. And so we're going to have to define what the future is and then transform the organization to go capture that. So organizations during this process were focused on making their infrastructure, their applications and networks and systems bulletproof. So hardening those, deploying some type of hybrid work model, operating model, IT system service delivery model, and transforming the way that they were communicating, delivering goods and services to customers and consumers, and then transforming the way that they were communicating and collaborating, and then providing customer experience and services to customers. So significant amount of change, right? Probably a decade worth of change within a couple of years is really what we experienced. Now, at the same time, what we saw was massive changes in the economy and workforce and market realities. Driving employee engagement and shifting the business to address new customer preferences and expectations was a massive theme for McKinsey, for KPMG, for some of these other research organizations that were constantly surveying executives in the marketplace globally. Organizations were being told and recommended, you must now operate with purpose. You need to create and communicate and reinforce a new vision, a new set of core values that align to the expectations of the market, expectations of customers and employees, and will drive outcomes. Organizations were told, and we saw massive movement towards organizations transforming in the cloud or leveraging cloud-based technologies to transform their business and their operating models. Organizations were told to deploy new IT and operating models that exploit cloud speed, agility, efficiency, and scalability, and candidly, help them to establish resiliency inside of IT operations and business operations. Now, what's interesting about the market realities that we're all dealing with today, right? After the invasion of Ukraine, what we've seen in terms of destabilization of global economy and some of the additional cybersecurity attacks and some of the innovation that we've seen just around attacks in dark web and criminal syndicate movement, which we'll get into in a minute, is 91% of executives that were surveyed by KPMG in Q4 of last year predicted that and expect a recession this year. So there's a significant amount of market volatility that the market rallied towards the end of the year. The U.S. market rallied towards the end of the year. It rallied the first part of January. We're now in earnings seasons, and so there's a lot of volatility in the marketplace. 34% believed that the recession will be extended, so it'll be a long recession, and everybody is concerned with inflation, with interest rates, housing market dynamics, et cetera. So you take that data and you put the backstop against it around recommendations that were being made and that we saw and that we were also communicating to the marketplace during this time, is really attempt to organize your business and your operating model for sustainability. So not just being resilient, but being sustainable. So you can weather the storm. Enable your team to make rapid changes. So build cross-matrix, cross-functional teams, master change management, cultivate and hire talent with purpose. So look for skills and capabilities outside of your organization that you can build and develop and recruit and bring inside your organization to fill the gaps of your organization, and then continue to build that internal muscle memory around what's the right way to perform hybrid work and or distributed extended work, and what's the right way to manage change and transformation. Recession expectations were easing towards the end of the year, but based upon what we've seen over the last week or so within the markets, there's still a significant amount of concern around inflation, interest rates, and of course the housing markets, as we've talked about. Let's dive into the cybersecurity trends that we're all dealing with. Global volume of cybersecurity attacks reached an all-time high in Q4. An average of over 1,100 weekly attacks per organization that was researched. Cyber attacks are increasing worldwide, 38% more cyber attacks per week. The US experienced an increase of 57% cyber attacks in 2022 as compared to 2021. Education, research, government, healthcare, and their supply chains were the most attacked. Actually, healthcare organizations experienced 1,410 cyber attacks per week, which is about 86% higher than the year previously. What we're seeing from a cyber criminal, a hacker, and just a cyber attack vector or target is a lot of focus on ISVs, on software manufacturers, on the manufacturing supply chain, on code repositories. I think those of us in the industry and those of you on the call, we've all heard about, the GitHub breach, the LastPass breach, Okta, CircleCI. There's a recent breach of DNV. Norton LifeLock announced a recent breach. And so, all of these breaches are targeted towards software companies, towards the manufacturing sector and or online code repositories. And so this demonstrates that cyber criminals, nation states, and hackers are targeting code, source code, and manufacturers and solution providers that service a wide variety of regulated industries. Now, 62% of these breaches were reported by Verizon as being targeted or coming out of the vendor in the supply chain. So supply chains across all regulated industry segments, not just healthcare, not just DIB, are actually being attacked. The average data breach cost is up to $9.4 million in the US, $4.35 million globally, and that is an increase over the previous year. Average healthcare data breach cost is now north of $10 million. That's an increase of 7 figures over 2021. And what's really scary is some of the new research and some of the new attacks that we're seeing coming out from AI engines and AI technology like ChatGPT. Those AI engines and those technologies are being leveraged to rapidly generate malicious code, misinformation, disinformation, malinformation, to generate malicious attacks at a far greater rate than other tools and other platforms and toolkits have in previous years. And so what does this mean? Well, this means that growing tsunami of cyber attacks, growing innovation in terms of attack methods and techniques, and a higher degree of automation in terms of attacks that we're all facing. Now, compare that against what's happening in regulatory compliance, either at the Fed level or at the state level or global. This growing tsunami of industry agnostic cyber attacks and breaches is driving new data privacy, new data disclosure, breach disclosure, and cybersecurity laws and regulations across the US and globally. The federal government is continually updating regulations and passing new legislations. This is a great website that I like to source and communicate, reginfo.gov. If you hit that website, you'll see all of the current regulatory actions under review by the federal government. How many are being voted on, how many are being passed, etc. Regulated industries are experiencing an increase in data privacy and breach legislation, settlements, and payouts. So again, all of these trends are going in the wrong direction. These new federal and disclosure laws and state level data privacy laws are increasing the cost and complexity of regulatory compliance programs. So there's trillions of revenue at risk for organizations that are now operating in multiple regulated industries because of these laws and regulations. The defense industry base, or the DIB that we've been mentioning, you know, they have revenue at risk because of the new cybersecurity maturity model certification that's being enforced and passed by the DoD. And if they don't go through that process, right, and if they don't put the appropriate controls and technologies in place, the reality is they will not be able to bid on over $680 billion of annual contracts. It's a very similar situation in auto dealer, mortgage broker, payday loan organizations that are dealing with loan origination. The new FTC safeguards ruling requires them to deploy technologies and controls, et cetera. And these organizations are scrambling because they could get fined or they could lose their ability to originate loans. And there's about $1.8 trillion a year in loan origination within those three segments that I mentioned. So the reality is the federal government's continuing to update these regulations and laws. 65% of organizations that respond to compliance surveys believe that compliance budgets will stay the same. Only 30% expect to grow. This is scary, right? Because of the amount of change, the amount of new law, new regulations that are being passed. The majority of the marketplace is going to be forced to do more with less, and there's already a massive growing gap of talent within the industry. So 66% of survey respondents expect an increase in staffing costs in 2023, and the backstop against that is a massive growing shortage of talent in terms of regulatory compliance. And of course, we already know cybersecurity. So again, that's what we've been dealing with, a significant amount of change, significant amount of transformation, growing tsunami of cyber attacks, and massive amount of new laws and regulations being imposed on organizations. So with that backstop, let's get to the meat of the conversation. Panel, how can organizations keep up with the rate of regulatory compliance change, the tsunami of cyber attacks, and marketplace change that we're seeing today? Have you seen any innovative or unique approaches to business transformation or corporate innovation that would enable these organizations to get ahead of the rate of change or address these new market realities that we're facing? Who wants to take a run at this?
Hey, Mark, I'm gonna jump on in and say, you know, that you set such a wonderful, sunshiny kind of perspective of what's going on in the market today. Truly love that. Truly love that.
Captain Sunshine.
That's right. That's right. And I mean that lovingly. I truly do. But in all seriousness, you know, those of us on the panel and on this attending this virtually or otherwise, we all need to understand you know, what Mark identified for us, the trends, the impacts, and just the growing reality of what we're faced with. Yeah, I think what I was glad to hear was really touching on what likely will be the 2023 game changer, and probably, you know, for future years, a big game changer, which is just the chat GPT tip of the iceberg in terms of AI involvement. You know, and as I look at kind of back over my 30-year career, I tend to be a little bit more pragmatic, probably than most, in that, you know, we now have a new vector to examine around how our adversaries will be examining or probing or trying to breach our environments using these new tools. But I still come back to, you know, rather than trying to chase the latest and greatest trend, do you have your common, you know, set of core technologies that you know, core processes, core education, and are your people fully enabled and aware of the type of issues? So, you know, there's still a need to adjust and change over time, but there's still, I think, a bigger need to ensure that you have things in place to handle the day in and day out needs of the marketplace. So don't forget, in other words, don't go chase the rabbit. Keep what you have, you know, and make certain what you have is in place, it's solid, and it works for you, and it is efficient and effective for you. And then you can start to innovate and expand.
Yeah,
Well said,
I think,
Stephen.
I think there's a paradigm shift. And this is not a dig, it's just living in reality. I think we've all seen this. There's a paradigm shift that businesses and the executive teams really need to get a quick grip on. We know there's so many companies that are up to date or read about what's happening, the threat vectors in the marketplace, and what's happening about the potential risks and how they're increasing. But there's still a ton of companies that think it hasn't happened to me. We're good so far. I'm not going to invest in this. The time to be reactive, in my opinion, that we're well past that point. Reactive is always very dangerous. But as Ed mentioned before, you have ChatGPT. The bad actors are using tools to do bad things way faster and more scalable than historical approaches to implementing defensive postures in cybersecurity or protecting clients' data, whether it's hospitals, software companies, vendors. So getting on the wagon and picking up some speed and getting your executive team, your board of directors to truly understand, and as you mentioned, Mark, you know, where it's becoming indistinguishable, strategy and security. You can't expect the business to say, I want to change and implement something, but I don't have any of the prerequisites to onboard the client, to check the vendor out, to find out if they're safe. So what do? They just do it with their eyes closed and they go, how did this happen? Well, you just enabled it. It was a little reckless. So adoption of cybersecurity as a strategy to business protection, as Ed was saying, are you doing the basics? Are you getting the foundation right? Are you maintaining that? I mean, it's hard to be good at complex things when the basics are being missed. So getting executive buy-in, getting the culture to say we accept, understand. I'm not saying use fear as a tactic, it's not, but you can't live outside of reality and say this won't happen to me because it hasn't happened before. Many companies, I've done assessments for companies, I'm sure the panel has done it as well, where they say nothing's wrong. We go in like, you've already had 6 breaches. I found this on your network. And by the way, I worked with a hospital where they infiltrated a Nest thermostat. What an Easter egg. Easter egg, for those who don't know, it's like a malware, if you will, that stays there dormant until one day it just pops open and it reinfected all the machines, CT scanners, you know, and MRIs, and then hacked in through the devices. They didn't even know it. So it's a cultural shift. And I think living in reality with some sense of urgency would be huge.
And Stephen, we didn't talk about this, right? We didn't talk about the trends in cybersecurity insurance, right? Cyber coverage, but cyber coverage is not a business backstop, right? That's not a viable strategy, right? Just because of, number one, the difficulties of even getting underwritten today. And the reality is it's not an either or anymore around cybersecurity insurance, meaning it's not, hey, either I'm going to invest in implementing a framework, process, procedures, controls, technologies, and I'm going to invest that way, and I'm not going to worry about cybersecurity insurance, or I'm not going to invest in that area, and I'm just going to go get coverage. Well, the reality is today, you can't get coverage if you don't have the basics that Ed was referencing, right? If you don't have good cyber hygiene and a program in place like you were mentioning, Stephen.
Yeah, if the due diligence is not there, they won't underwrite you, or they'll give you a really high cost and give you nominal coverage, so you're still exposed. I'm sorry.
Right. Yeah, and the other issue is also with when you're starting to talk about cyber insurance is that you can't guarantee they're going to pay off. I mean, we just saw in the news last week how one of the largest insurance companies refused to pay off on a ransomware breach because it didn't cause physical damage. Now that's going to have impact across the entire industry, because how often do you ever see ransomware cause physical damage? So again, we're going to have to look at this. But if I go back to your question, it was kind of funny when you asked the question, how can organizations keep up with this rate of change? The first thing I said was, you can't. Now, you can throw your hands up and you can say, okay, we can't do it. What are we going to do? But in the reality is you got to figure out some way. So what I've been seeing a lot lately is more and more companies are coming to experts in order to help them through it. Now, if I go back 5 years ago, I would say maybe 10% of companies, maybe 15% would look at the big 5 advisory services, come in, tell me what I can do better, look at my approach, how am I doing, and change things. Now I'm seeing smaller companies, I'm talking less than $10 million in revenue, going and bringing in companies like my own in order to look at their processes, look at what they're doing. How do we keep up with this? We can't rely on our own people. We need an expert to come in here and help us to figure out what we can do, how we can do it the best way, how we can save money doing it, how we can keep up with the regulations, which ones do we have to be worried about, and how can we do it cheaper and better and faster. So for the consultants of the world, this has opened up a whole nother opportunity for us to be able to get out there and actually help organizations. Bad side is, as Dr. Inocencio was just speaking about, is that what I'm seeing is companies are bringing us in, and when we do go in to do a risk assessment, I'm seeing major issues and problems already in place, that they've been hacked, or in one case just 2 weeks ago, we went in to do a risk assessment and we found the hackers were actually there while we're in doing the risk assessment. So people are going to have to realize that you cannot wait, to trade off insurance for either or. No, you can't do that. You can't wait until you get breached, because when you do get breached, it's going to cost you 10, 100 times more than if you just went ahead and did something. It goes back to the old saying, a ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. That plays into this market very well.
And I'm going to jump really quick into something, because I think there's a nuance to your question, Mark, that I want to make certain that the cyber professionals who are on the front lines day to day implementing programs and protecting companies, know that there's great people out there from a consulting standpoint. Many of them are on this call. But also, what can you be doing as a cyber professional? And I think that I'm going to come back, and while I think it's important to continue to stress to your organization the foundational elements, technology-wise, process-wise, personnel, personnel education, supply chains, et cetera, getting those basics down, there's also a really strong opportunity to engage the organization in being able to embed cybersecurity at the onset of innovation and process change. And kind of shift things left, so to speak, in the sense of, take advantage of not just the cyber related issues that ChatGPT are going to present, but the actual business related issues that ChatGPT and these kinds of platforms will present to business, both in the way of operational transformation, as well as competitive transformation in the larger marketplace. So this is actually an opportunity for cyber leaders to engage in the organization on a forward-leaning opportunity to pull those basics and those fundamentals on in, and be at the table while that innovation and examination of market trends are occurring.
Last year I saw something, I'm sure other people have seen this as well. It was a pretty sad event where a bad actor breached a hospital, shut down Epic, shut down the EKG machines, shut down everything. So the hospital, which was a trauma 2 or trauma 3, had to close. An ambulance is coming in with a gentleman with a heart issue. They had to transfer him to a different hospital and he died in transit. Right. So that's how more material can you get than loss of life? It's pretty bad. So again, it's not fear as a tactic to get people to invest and understand. It's just look at the reality we're living in, and it's an exponential multiplier. We talk about breaches really quick, and I'll make this fast. I know we need to move on. Of 10 million plus, everyone saw what happened to Scripps Healthcare was a year and a half ago. 30,
Right.
I'm generalizing, 36,000 records, $1,400 fine per record. That's $50 million and change. And that's before they fixed anything.
Mhm.
Who can afford that? That could shut a business down, right? So
Right, and that's, let me double click on that comment, right? These are, look, for those of us that have been tracking this and reporting on this for some time, healthcare has been owned. They've been owned for 7-8 years, and their supply chain has been owned as well. And so it's not getting better. The pandemic completely broke that market segment, and there are there's a significant number of and growing number of organizations, healthcare entities that are going bankrupt, right? That and they're dealing with employee strikes. We know that there's a shortage of talent in that industry as well, right? So you see all of these market dynamics playing out in that particular regulated industry, which is so critical to the infrastructure and to our well-being in the U.S. And it's just not getting any better for them. And so, I'll, to your point, Stephen, I think this is a massive problem, and we need to come together, right, as an industry and recognize, and a set of leaders and recognize that problem's not getting better, risk is not getting better, it's getting worse. We all need to band together. And to Brian's point, we may or may not be able to get ahead of the risk and stay ahead of the rate of change, but what we can do is get better at what we do, right? All we can control, we should be focused on what we can control, not what we can't control, right? Focus on what we can control, and what we can control is do the right thing, redirect spending, right? Invest in programs, invest in people, and build programs and capabilities inside of our organizations that enable us to change faster and more effectively. And so with that, I'll transition to the next question, which is, in what you're seeing in the marketplace today, how are organizations rethinking their use of cloud and other technologies to drive greater sustainability and resiliency? And what's the net impact of those changes on cybersecurity and regulatory compliance? Are there certain technologies and applications being used, right, that are accelerating change while still enhancing resiliency? What do you guys?
I will love to jump in on this one. As Mark, as you know, I was part of the team when I was at Verizon Terra to actually take over the Obamacare, the healthcare.gov site, after it was breached, and then to secure it properly. And it has not been breached since. And I think that's a great testament to the fact that if you do something correctly, and if you put in the proper controls, you can protect a site 100%. That's an absolute testament to the fact of throw enough money, enough people, enough process and things at anything, and you can do a proper job of securing it. Now, obviously, most companies don't have the resources of the federal government and the resources of being able to spend that kind of money. But I think the key point is still there. And that is that if you properly design something and it's done by the right people with the right knowledge, then you could be able to make the use of cloud actually work for you. Now, the flip side of that coin is, and I want to make this really clear, don't expect cloud to be your secure solution. You just got done literally like 10 minutes ago talking about some of the largest cloud companies, the largest SaaS companies that have been breached in the last 2 years. Why? It wasn't because they were using cloud. It's because they didn't have internal controls in order to properly secure their cloud technology. So don't think of cloud as being the end-all solution. Oh, I'm going to move all my stuff to the cloud. I'm going to be more secure. Nobody can be able to hack me because I'm in the cloud. Wrong. That's completely fallacy and a fairy tale. I hate to break it to anybody that believes in Santa Claus, but hey, there it is. But the case is, it's not just the idea of going to the cloud that's going to make you more secure. You still have to be more secure with the internal technologies. Now, on the flip, again, let's go back to your point about deployment. Are there certain technologies, applications that could be used? Absolutely. There are a lot of technologies out there, such as Kubernetes. If you're not familiar with Kubernetes, it's an ability of being able to containerize things. There's a lot of different applications that are out there in order to be able to facilitate being able to bring that that built-in security of the cloud into your internal operations. So, like I said, and this kind of feeds right back to Ed, which is that, you know, we've got all these colleges that are trying to keep up with the education and bringing upon the 1 million+ people that we're lacking in order to do it. But I still say, go back and utilize the people that are out there today that have the expertise to help shore up until your company gets to that point in time. Look at those companies that can be able to come in and help you out to properly architect something, to properly implement something, to properly run the processes and get things done correctly. Like I said, and the ending point is cloud is not the silver bullet. So I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
I'll just jump in on that, Brian. I couldn't agree with you more. I think the interesting forward-leaning trend that I would put forward is, you know, cloud for the better part of almost nearing a decade, if not more, has been that, as you said, that silver bullet. And, you know, you have, you know, organizations at the management consulting level, you know, continually pushing cloud. What's been interesting to watch is, as those trends have been occurring, is this counterweight. You know, that always, you know, the perpetual back and forth of our industry of, you know, distribute or centralize, distribute or centralize. The pendulum weight is now starting to begin to move, in my opinion, at least, back towards you know, data centers weren't bad. You know, capital costs weren't bad. Having everything be operating costs kind of gets a little expensive. And oh yeah, we still have to secure everything. So what I would encourage the viewers of this to understand is that, you know, just like Brian said, cloud is never going to be a silver bullet. No technology is ever going to be a silver bullet. You're going to have to build in, you know, appropriate control and security of your technologies, understanding where you have process issues and process vulnerabilities. And then more than anything else, I mean, let's just address the big elephant in the room from a resiliency standpoint. And ultimately, that is understanding that we will always have to have people somewhere involved in a process, and that people will eventually be, or have an opportunity to be, compromised in some fashion. And so if we kind of move forward with those sounding principles and drive an awareness and a need to shore up those three key elements with a focus on people, and not, I'm not just talking about like standard, you know, annual 30-minute cybersecurity awareness training. I'm saying helping people begin to understand at an operational level how they own a portion of the overarching cyber risk management and overall resiliency of the business that they're a part of. And I think if we take that kind of an approach to not just focus on the technology as a solution set, but then also then understand that we have to continually focus back on people, because I don't care what technology you change to or what the pendulum swing of technology happens to be. If I have a person that's willing to give away their password to Lapsus because they paid me $50 or they paid me in a chocolate bar, you know what, my organization is going to be compromised irrespective.
Well said. Again, thank you, panel members, for your insightful comments and your perspective. Last question before we get into some best practices and key takeaways. How can organizations evolve their cyber and risk practices to keep pace with the new normal and what's the path forward? So how can organizations better prepare themselves for the new normal and stay ahead of these ever-changing risks, threats, and market demands, including some of the new innovative and disruptive AI technologies and AI-driven threats that we're seeing specifically around chat, GPT, and other similar type technologies?
Well, I'll jump out there. So one of the things that I found interesting is that a lot more companies are investing in AI for protection. There's quite a number of them out there. I'll just touch on just one, CrowdStrike. I love their technology. There's several others out there that I think are very, very good. But I definitely think that in the mode we're in today, you can't just throw people at a problem. You're gonna have to invest in some kind of technology that allows you to move faster, quicker, and smarter. If you're not, using a SIM, if you're not doing some of what we think is the basic, throwing in a bet, if you're at the poker table, whatever. This is just that little entry. You gotta get into the game here. And one of those is by investing in some of the technologies that allows you to be able to do this kind of stuff. An AI technology or such. The other thing that I'm seeing is a lot more companies are now looking at how they're being attacked, what's being successful. And one of the areas that we see anyways, companies investing a lot more money into is just doing risk assessments. Any one of us, we can walk into a company and in one day say, here's the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different things that I can see right now that you've got a problem with. This is what I suggest you do. Well, we're seeing a lot more companies that are getting smart and they're saying, you know what, I can't have my own people looking at, something. And it goes back to the old story we've talked about so many times, Mark, about, your baby being ugly. If you're the IT director, if you're the CIO, you can't look at your baby and say, my baby's ugly. I need to do something new with this ugly baby. You got to have somebody else come in, look at your operations, your abilities, your systems, your technology with a unconscionable way and be able to say that baby is ugly and you need to do something about it. And I'm seeing a lot more companies that are investing in doing these quick risk assessments that allow them to be able to quickly look at the areas of true compromise and the ways that people are getting in. You talked about at the very beginning about the third parties. I'm seeing the same thing, which is that more and more when I'm brought in after a breach, it's the third party that allowed the breach to occur. So these are some of the things that people can do very quickly, very cheap, and be able to do it quite easily and quite quickly to where they can be able to turn around and improve their posture by 30, 50, 80% just within a matter of days or weeks.
Yeah, I think that's well said, Brian. And thank you for bringing that up. I think to dovetail onto that and add a little more detail too, the company should first know thyself, right? If they have a team that can handle 5 projects and they got 20 on their list, that never happens, right? They're overburdened, overworked. This is just the world we live in. Well, then consider using someone that once you do, like if a Brian came in and did an assessment and says, here's your risk, you create a risk register, here's the ones we're fixing in priority order, and then you go address them, great. In 2 weeks from now, if you don't do your next set of patches, you have another vulnerability. So don't allow yourself to slip once you've calibrated and gone on target. So what you could do for things like that, and that's why I say first know thyself. If your team's capable of maintaining that security maturity that you just built and fixed through that gap analysis, great. Make it a cadence, make it a cultural thing, make it a policy that you enforce, right? It's a standard operating procedure. This is how we're gonna do it so we never have that vulnerability or exposure again. And if you can't, that's okay. Don't try to become the expert, the guru in a day. It's very difficult. In some cases, it can't happen. Then you can go out and deal with a partner and come up with a contract for them to do your managed patch management. Or say, you know what, we're going to take a look at this assessment, update it quarterly, but monthly, we're going to come in and make sure that the train stays on the rails, right? We're not allowing you to derail. Oh, you're taking off a vendor? Great. Before you decommission that vendor, did they destroy all your data? What's their data retention policy, data destruction policy? Did they give you some kind of attestation that they got rid of it to the best possible means that are reasonable and prudent, so the client has a protective posture that's defensible in court, right? Because if you do nothing and you decommission that vendor and he gets breached and they steal your data, they're the custodian, you're liable, right? So there's a lot of little gaps. And like Brian said, the three of us have more than enough experience to come in and look at these things. Once we look at your systems, we look at your policies, we look at what your cadence is, operations, what's covered, what's not, and then where your data lives, who saves it in Excel in their local machine, it's taken out of the ERM or the Epic system or the Salesforce CRM or whatever it may be. We look at these different things. We say, okay, now we see how you function, how you say you operate, how you really operate, and here's the reality of the things you need to do to better protect. And again, there's, like Brian said, there's tons of tools out there. People think that I'm going to, just get one thing that monitors everything, but they don't really know where their data lives. You got to have it a full picture. You can't protect something you can't see and that you're not monitoring. So if you have visibility into the risks of your ecosystem, whether it's in the cloud, on-prem, co-location provider, regardless of what it is, you have a better chance of, one, you do a gap analysis, identifying where those risks are, and then being able to remediate them, and ideally proactively.
And I think one of the things that you're both saying, and just to kind of, in my perspective, sum it up, is that we've got to be able to continually remind executive management, as well as ourselves and our staff members and our respective security programs, that this is, to use the old adage, this is a process. We will continually have to put these things in place, continually monitoring, continually assessing, because the surface changes, the vectors change, and if possible, leverage what we can and how we can in terms of technology, process, and the people we have to better enable to come back to the R word, the resiliency word, to better enable an effective ability by our respective organizations to respond to and come back up to an operating level that's acceptable after a breach has occurred. So, dovetailing the kind of if but when, if it's no longer if a breach occurs, it's when a breach will occur, but then how quickly can I get back up to speed so that business continuity, the whole business continuity practice and area of our industry, is now fully in play, and making that a continual loop process, not just a one-time project that, oh, hey, we wiped the sweat from our brow, we've done everything we need to do, now we're going to be secure forever and ever and ever. That's the biggest fallacy of all within executive management and board rooms right now.
Gentlemen, well said. Well said. We're coming into the home stretch. Again, and I said at the beginning, this would be a very engaging conversation, and it's proved out to be. But Dr. Stephen, why don't you take a minute or so, summarize your best practices and key takeaways, and then we'll have Brian and Ed do the same.
Sure thing. And some of this you'll hear, it's a little repetitive. If you're going to use, cloud technologies, on-premise technologies, find out what the culture of your business is and make sure the culture of your business is supportive of your investment and your strategy. Just to go and say, I'm going to get a budget from my C-level and go implement this doesn't mean you solve the problem. How are you solving the problem? And what are the right tools for the right fit? Because sometimes cloud is not the answer. And that may not be a popular thing that people want to hear, but it's a great fit in some place, and other fits it's not. Perfect the basics and then maintain that posture. Keep up to speed with your asset inventory. Again, if you don't have a good asset management system, how do you patch something you don't know is on your network, whether it's rogue IT or someone deployed it on their own? You got to do the basics well. Asset management, patch management, and testing. Keep testing systems. Don't do like some companies that say, I'll do a pen test once a year, or I'll scan my network once every 6 months. What happens the day after you scan it, or 2 weeks later, if there's a vulnerability, it popped up and you think you're fine, right? It's a trust but verify approach. Same thing for your third-party vendors. Build a third-party management program that tests them, measures their scores, helps them remediate their issues before you start sharing data and connecting your networks. Otherwise, a bad actor will just traverse your systems. And whenever you build something, don't build the most complex, elaborate, and high-tech solution. Sometimes the technology works best when you keep it simple. And simple is easy to maintain and operate. It's also easy to troubleshoot, and it gives you less things to look at. So simplicity in technology and security goes really well together. And if you have, 400 systems and someone says, I want to get a new one and it integrates with 20, that project's going to take forever. If it integrates with 4, it's not so bad. If it integrates with 2, you're much faster, right? And you know what's there. It's hard for IT and security departments to be overtaxed, be the masters of 50 products, 30 platforms, 3 cloud environments. Let's not make it impossible for them to do their job. We're not enabling them to be successful. And then when in doubt, test and retest again, do your assessments. It's a great way to have an expert come in, unbiased opinion, and just tell you the truth about what they see so you can make those informed decisions going forward.
Well said, sir. Brian.
Great points. One of the things I love doing is coaching and mentoring, bringing up the next generation of security professionals. Mark knows that I'll do anything to, for going in front of an audience of a college or university. And I get asked a lot about what should I do to prepare for being a cybersecurity expert. My first point there is right out of Sun Tzu, Art of War. It's to better understand your environment, you got to understand your weaknesses. And one of the things that I tell people is study as much as you can when you're in college about history of war. And also, one of the best things for doing it is the battle technology. It plays very well into cybersecurity when you're talking about flanking movements and things like that. So know yourself, and that comes straight out of Sun Tzu, Art of War. If you want to read a great book, that's one. I was one of the first, I think within the first 100 people that were actually cloud certified, security cloud certified. And the reason I did that, I was working at Terra and Verizon at the time. And we came up with 3 questions, just 3, that when we asked a customer that was interested in going to the cloud, we knew whether or not it was a good or a bad move. And that's how simple it can be. There are some companies, and Dr. Inocencio, sorry. You made a really good point about there are people that should be going to the cloud, there are people that should not be going to the cloud. And you got to understand which side of the fence you're on. I'm sorry about your name. The one thing I've learned is that when I look at risk assessments and risk management, is that we find that the majority of breaches are all occurring in the same way. Is that because we're so slow at learning that we cannot be able to comprehend that the bad guy always comes to the front door? Well, they don't. But if your front door is open, they're going to come through the front door. Okay, it's as simple as that. So don't think about the 150,000 vulnerabilities that are out there. Think about the vulnerabilities that impact your environment that are the ones that most people are using in order to break in. And that's where you want to start. Last point is definitely, I believe this wholeheartedly. I was doing it when I was young, and I thought I knew everything about cybersecurity when I got out of college. So I'm sure that they do too. But look at your experts that are out there. Look at the people. I mean, I'm learning things listening to Stephen and to Edward today, and Mark, you also, always. I love to listen to people discuss and intelligently debate the issues of security, because that's where you learn. And so what I'm saying is, don't be afraid to consult the experts that are out there. They get to talk to 100 companies. You work for one company as a CIO or as a director of security. A professional talks to 50 every year, 100 every year, 10,000 in their lifetime. They will know things that you will never even comprehend, and definitely look to pull in that expertise in your environment, and don't be afraid of saying, I don't know. Ed?
Brian, well said. Ed?
Yeah, this is a great panel. I'm humbled at the expertise that's here. So my big thanks to both Brian and Stephen. So I had a couple of key takeaways. I've touched on 2 of them already briefly during the conversation. I'm going to really kind of double click on the very first bullet there. We've talked about, I brought up people, we've talked about cloud and so forth. But one of the big things that we have, is we all know from a cyber perspective, is that we have this massive supply and demand imbalance that is going on right now in our industry, where Last record here just in the US, well over 750,000 openings that are going unfilled in cyber. There was a note today that came out on, I think, Department of Labor that identified, that there was a gap of almost 2.5 million total workers in the workforce. So we know that there's significant need within your respective programs, and oftentimes, when I talk to companies, and even when I was running Terra Verde and was involved with Avertium, one of the struggles that we always had was attracting and retaining, and knowing where the channels of workforce were. And so my first key takeaway to help improve the resiliency and improve your posture is to make certain that you are aligning with your academic partners who understand who they are. And that it's a bit of a twist on what we've been talking about here. But the key element here is, are they specifically developing through their programs of study, through their models, are they developing a workforce that's ready for you and that's ready to work? And if they're not, my engagement to you all is to get engaged with them, give them feedback, force their hand where you need to make the necessary changes. Because all too often, what I've found in my career is that we've been receiving workers into our companies, into our respective organizations, and we still then have to take time and effort and spend real dollars to get them ready to sit in the seat. And this is a challenge that underlies all of these elements. So I'm asking, because I'm in the middle of this process and testing this thesis that I've talked about at the beginning, which was, can we build a better workforce? And I believe that we can, but it requires industry involvement. The second point is, as was already touched on by both Stephen and Brian, was understanding the efficacy. If you have an environment, if you have a security technology plant that is made up of 30 different organizations, 30 different providers, that has to be integrated, that has no functional service model, and that you are just throwing good people after good person into trying to run and operate, there is going to be a reckoning by your CFO or by your CEO asking, why are we spending so much money on this? The overall macroeconomic aspects that are going on right now, we almost force that hand and force that analysis. And so understanding the efficacy of your program, are you right spending in order to achieve the necessary goals that you have from a risk management and resiliency perspective? And the final is, you've heard me beat this drum multiple times throughout the presentation. This is a process. You have to have the basics right. I don't care what metaphor you want to use. We can talk about a house and having your foundation right. You can talk about, having good, solid practices. But at the end of the day, if we're not doing the basics right, how can we be expected to turn around and continually try to advance ourselves and do more, faster, better? It's effectively, in the old business world, it's negative margin isn't made up through volume. I don't make more money when I lose money on every single unit. So, this goes to our reaction sometimes to chasing the rabbit, is how I call it. Being sitting there and saying, hey, we've got to go focus on this grand new thing that's going on, and we've got to spend money to go shore this up. But the house is teetering. We're down to the last Jenga piece, and our security house is wobbling back and forth. And when it falls over, ultimately, from a leadership standpoint and from a program standpoint, the examination occurs. And I believe what's going to start to happen, it already has, but what's going to start to increase in occurrence is that cybersecurity leaders will find themselves being held very accountable for the spend, for the resiliency, and overall for the ability to reduce risk appropriately, which goes to, am I doing the core basic things correct? So thank you for being a part of this. I really appreciate it. It's great to see many of you, and I look forward to chatting more as needed.
Team, I'm going to blow through my recommendations. Look, the reality is hacking the human works. These attacks are pervasive. They're evolving and accelerating at an alarming rate, and AI technology greatly enables that. So, my recommendation is very similar to those of the panel. Invest in a program, play the long game, right? Invest in people, invest in patching, vulnerability management, invest in reviewing and evaluating your password policies, and invest in a program. Look for trusted partners, people that do continuous vulnerability scanning. If you're trying to struggle getting your arms around your IT assets that are within your environment or your critical vulnerabilities, reach out to Mars, right? Reach out to other experts in the industry that can do continuous vulnerability scanning, continuous cybersecurity risk alerting, monitoring, and response. But from a business and an organizational perspective, I think we all need to rethink our products, our services, our solutions, and how we're going to address higher inflation, potentially longer term higher inflation, lower consumer confidence, and evolving and constantly changing customer and employee expectations. So that will cause us, like that backdrop causes us to take a big step back and rethink the business, our strategy, our operations, and that includes our cyber and our risk programs and posture. We know that the market is volatile. Pandemics, China, Russia, right? War, etc. These are all going to continue to create volatility in the market. And this could lead to large swings in terms of the market. And so we just need to be prepared for that. This is the contact information for the panelists and myself. We will publish this recording. We will circulate the slides to the attendees. At the end of the day, I think we've had good collaboration, good communication through the chat. We don't have time for any additional questions, but here's what we'll do. We do have a couple of offers for organizations that are listening to this recording or that participated in this event. If you would like a cybersecurity posture review or a cybersecurity insurance coverage review, please reach out to us. We also have another offer. We are performing a significant amount of market research. And so if you want to participate in a cybersecurity research survey or a regulatory compliance research survey, please reach out to us at sales@marsuite.com. And with that, panel members, thank you so much. Very engaging conversation, very insightful. We value and appreciate your time as well as the attendees. We're going to wrap. Thank you so much for participating today.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.